Why is this trash here? Get out, you lowlife.
George, who was set to become Emily's father-in-law, hurled the insult at me. It was obvious why he called me trash and a lowlife. I dropped out of college to work and raise Emily when she was just a baby. In other words, my highest level of education was high school, making me worthless in George's eyes, who worshipped academic credentials. I glared at George. I won't let insults like this shake me. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then David, Emily's soon-to-be husband, shouted at George.
Then you get out.
What? David, what did you just say? Is that any way to talk to your father?
George's face froze in shock. David, who was usually obedient to his father, couldn't tolerate the insult toward me. Being separated from his mother as a child, David had held a deep resentment toward George for years. My name is Rachel, and I'm a 49-year-old reporter for a local newspaper. I run around every day chasing scoops with my photographer partner. I also have another role, being the guardian of my younger sister, Emily. 30 years ago, our parents passed away one after the other due to illness. Emily was 3 months old, and I was 19 at the time. Since our parents had no siblings, our distant relatives tried to push the responsibility of caring for us onto each other. There was even talk of putting Emily up for adoption, but I fiercely rejected it.
If a wealthy family takes her in, Emily will be happy. And Rachel, you'd be free to live your own life.
I'm not giving Emily up to anyone. I'll be her mom and dad. I couldn't bear to be separated from Emily, so I dropped out of the college I was attending and started working for a local newspaper. At first, I was just a gopher, but as the years went by, I earned their trust, and now I get to write a daily column that makes the front page. Emily, who was once just a little girl, has grown up and now works as a full-fledged nurse. In the end, I turned 49 without getting married, but I have no regrets about my life. A big change is coming to our family. Emily is going to marry a doctor from the hospital where she works. As I marvel at how quickly time has passed, I welcome Emily's marriage. When I woke up in the morning, the smell of sizzling sausages filled the air. Emily, just back from her night shift, was making breakfast for me. She noticed I was up and called out to me.
Good morning, Rachel. The sausages and scrambled eggs will be ready soon, so pop some bread in the toaster.
You must be tired after your night shift. Thanks so much. The usual toast setting?
No sugar in the milk. If I gain even a little weight, my wedding dress will be tight.
Well, that's because you picked such a snug-fitting dress. But with how hard you nurses work, I doubt you'll gain weight. We sat at the dining table, eating a warm breakfast like usual. Since we both have irregular work hours, it's rare for us to have a meal together. And soon, these happy days will come to an end. As I finish my warm milk, Emily looks at me with a serious expression.
Rachel, thank you so much for raising me all these years. Even after I marry David, I'll still do my best to take care of you.
I nod with a smile, but my heart feels heavy when I think about the challenges that lie ahead for her. Emily's partner, David Johnson, is a physician at the same hospital where she works. On top of that, he's the eldest son of George Johnson, the director of the Johnson Clinic where they work. In other words, she's set to become the wife of the future director, and George has imposed several conditions. First, she has to quit her job at the hospital. They'll also have to live in George's home after the wedding, so a life together as a newlywed couple won't be allowed. Additionally, there are generations-old recipes she'll be expected to learn and recreate. I can't help but feel this is such an outdated way of thinking. But I felt guilty for not raising Emily in a so-called proper family. That's why I couldn't bring myself to say anything. George sounds pretty strict. Living with him is going to be stressful. You can always come back home.
Oh, Rachel, I haven't even gotten married yet. You're getting ahead of yourself.
You're right. Besides, I haven't even met George yet. That was the biggest concern for Emily's happiness. David and I both tried to arrange a meeting with the Johnsons, but George kept making excuses, and the wedding day arrived without it happening. It seems like he just doesn't want to meet me. I wonder if Emily can really be happy marrying David under these circumstances.
Well, it'll work out somehow. I've heard George is difficult, but since he lives apart from David's mom, you'll only have to deal with George.
David also grew up without his mother from an early age. Apparently, George, a tyrant, drove David's mother, Laura, out of their house. David couldn't feel his mother's presence when he needed her the most. Still, according to Emily, he has a kind and sincere personality. Given his difficult life, he could have easily ended up bitter and resentful. Of course, at first I was more worried than anything else. I thought sending Emily into a world of luxury we were unfamiliar with might lead to unhappiness. But when I actually met David, all my concerns disappeared. When we met the other day, I could see it clearly. He's truly honest and straightforward. With someone like that, I know I can trust Emily to him.
But he says he had a really tough childhood. I, on the other hand, had fun living with you, Rachel.
Emily was enjoying her life so much that I felt bad for ever feeling sorry for her. Happiness and unhappiness seem to exist on a different level than financial security.
We were poor, but we never had those kinds of problems. That's because you took me in, Rachel.
Both Emily and I realized again how incredibly precious these simple moments were. I still want to support Emily and David's future, but part of me wishes these happy moments could last forever. This marriage will change Emily's life significantly. Up until now, she held the title of nurse at the Johnson Clinic. But by marrying David, she will become the wife of the future director. On top of that, George Johnson, the current director, will become her father-in-law. And George is nothing but a bundle of problems. George is a surgeon, but he hasn't performed any surgeries in the past 2 years. He treats other doctors and nurses so harshly that many end up quitting. Patients don't speak highly of him either.
George is kind of scary. It feels like I'm going to get scolded, so I'd rather not go to him for an appointment.
On the other hand, David, the young doctor, has a good reputation. He probably dislikes George. You can tell from the way he talks about him. The first day I met David, he said this.
My father has a very short temper, and if things don't go his way, he stays grumpy. Living with him is incredibly stressful.
Wait a minute, David. That makes me worried. Isn't Emily going to live in George's house?
I'm trying to prevent that. Ever since he kicked my mom out, the house has felt lifeless. Though, to be honest, I don't have many memories of my mom being there.
David has such a straightforward nature that I liked him right away. But he's so honest that he can't lie. He hates straying off course and prefers to charge straight ahead. Emily says that's what she finds attractive about him. That's probably why he can't soften his words to keep me from worrying.
But my father doesn't seem to dislike Emily. He just wants a daughter-in-law who'll blend into the family.
Hearing this, Emily puffs out her cheeks in frustration.
I've told you, I hate that old-fashioned idea of becoming your partner's shadow. Family is something a couple builds together. I won't enter a world where my opinions don't matter.
David nods at Emily's words and then turns to me.
This is our biggest challenge right now. I don't want to move back home either. I want to find a way for us to live together. Just the two of us.
David, are you willing to stand up to George for Emily's sake? He seems like such a difficult man. I don't want Emily to live in that house.
I understand. I plan to make my stance clear before our wedding day.
Then he suddenly looks somber and averts his gaze from me.
With our marriage, I might end up making you uncomfortable, Rachel. It's hard to say, but my father is a firm believer in academic credentials. He only approved of Emily because she's a nurse who graduated from college.
Throughout my life, my high school diploma has been an issue more times than I can count. When I started working as an apprentice at the newspaper, I met people with all sorts of values. And the truth is, many of them looked down on my education. I swallowed my anxiety and spoke. So basically, George doesn't like me because I don't have a degree.
To be completely honest, yes. But I care deeply about you, Rachel. I want us to stay close as family from now on.
For now, our conversation didn't go any further, and the issue was left unresolved. The wedding preparations continued, and the date was officially set. Emily confessed to me with a worried look.
When I told George that you dropped out of college, he called you a total loser. Honestly, if he's going to be my father-in-law, I'd rather call the wedding off.
Don't say that. I'm not the one getting married. If he likes you, that's all that matters. I'll do my best to stay out of the way.
Even before I started dating David, I'd heard George was scary. The wedding day is going to be terrifying.
My fear is that you might do something embarrassing at the wedding. Even David might lose his love for you in an instant. I tried to respond cheerfully, but my heart was heavy. It hurt to see Emily worrying about me. But since I'm her only family, there's no way I could skip the wedding. I decided to brace myself and ignore any snide remarks that came my way. On the wedding day, I had my hair done at the salon and wore a dress for the first time in my life. Emily had stayed at the hotel the night before, getting a head start on the wedding preparations. Once I was ready, I headed to the venue. When I asked at the front desk, they immediately led me to the bridal waiting room. Emily, dressed in a beautiful wedding gown, turned to me with a smile as I entered the room.
It feels like I lost a bit of weight since the fitting. The dress is a bit loose around the chest. David said it must be all the stress.
As Emily spoke casually, my own nerves were hitting their peak. We had never managed to meet George before the wedding day. He was clearly avoiding us. Maybe it's better if I don't attend this wedding, He might refuse to let me into the venue just because I'm here. This wedding was being held at the most prestigious hotel in the area. The bridal waiting room was spacious, with a table in the center holding a pitcher of water and a few glasses. I'm so nervous. Let me drink some water. I need to calm down. Just then, the door suddenly opened, and an older gentleman with thick gray hair stepped in. Behind him, David appeared with a tense expression. I didn't know why they had come, but this was effectively our first family meeting. George, the director of a large hospital, carried an intimidating presence. Deep wrinkles lined his face, but in his youth, he must have been quite handsome. His sharp eyes scanned the room, like he was searching for surveillance cameras. I doubted those eyes had ever softened with kindness. Hurriedly, I set my glass down on the table and greeted him. Hello, it's nice to meet you. I'm Rachel, Emily's older sister. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hadn't expected any kind words. Even if he ignored me coldly, I was determined to endure the day. I had prepared myself for the worst scenarios and how to handle them. But George went beyond anything I expected, and the first thing he did was yell at me.
Why is this trash here? Get out, you lowlife.
It was clear that he called me trash and a lowlife because of my lack of a college degree. My current career didn't matter. Even if I were a CEO, his attitude wouldn't have changed. To George, an academic elitist, my high school diploma made me trash and a lowlife. I glared at George. I won't let insults like this shake me. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then David, standing behind George, moved closer to Emily in her wedding dress and shouted at George.
Then you get out.
What? David, what did you just say? Is that any way to talk to your father?
George's face froze in shock. David, who was usually obedient to his father, couldn't tolerate the insult toward me.
I've reached my limit. Rachel is my beloved sister-in-law. Emily is my precious wife, and it's my duty to protect them both.
George's face turned red with anger at his own son's words.
Before you talk about your wife and sisters-in-law, remember that I'm your father. Have you forgotten respect for your father?
I held on to hope until the very end. If you'd shown Rachel any respect, we were ready to call off our plan.
As George stood dumbfounded, Emily nodded firmly.
The truth is, we went to the courthouse last night and filed our marriage license. We wanted to be ready to act if the worst happened before the ceremony.
I was surprised, but George was completely stunned.
You filed the marriage without the head of the family's permission. Do you really think you can get away with such selfishness? You can only file it after I approve, and we have a proper ceremony. I knew it. People with just a high school education can't raise decent kids.
Hearing him use words like head of the family was astonishingly outdated. I forced myself to stay calm and kept my voice steady. You must have been a terrible father. Do you seriously think David wouldn't resent you for taking his mother, Laura, away from him?
Laura has nothing to do with this now. Do you know who made David the man he is today? If she'd taken him, he wouldn't have become a doctor or lived such a comfortable life.
No matter how wealthy you are, that life must have been miserable. Staying with you meant his future as a doctor and heir to the hospital was decided. But if he'd lived with Laura, he would have had options.
That would have been better. I don't regret becoming a doctor, but I hate being treated as your successor.
I was curious about the circumstances behind George and Laura's divorce. When the argument settled down, I asked David, "When did George and Laura get divorced?"
When I was in first grade, one day I came home from school and my mom was gone. She never came back. He kicked her out with just the clothes on her back.
Emily furrowed her brows, her face full of sympathy for David.
It's awful, isn't it? Laura wanted to take David with her, but she gave up, knowing she couldn't provide him with a good education.
How do you two know so much about Laura? Wait, you met her, didn't you?
Yeah, Emily and I met her. We were planning to live with her after the wedding. If you had shown Rachel even a hint of respect, we were willing to reconsider.
Filing the marriage license without permission was part of their plan to prepare for living with Laura. I understand that, but what about the ceremony?
We secretly invited my mother, but my father found out and just kicked her out. I refused to have a wedding without her there.
So that's why you came to the bridal waiting room, to cancel the ceremony? David nodded seriously.
I feel awful for wanting to cancel, especially when Emily looks so beautiful in her wedding dress. But I came here believing she would understand.
I don't mind at all. I can already guess what kind of wedding George planned, just going around greeting all the local big shots.
Emily quickly pulled the white veil off her head.
I want to live with Laura too. There's no way I'm facing George every day after he insulted Rachel, who raised me like a parent.
George was furious at Emily's unexpected defiance.
Well, I refuse to accept that. I agreed to this marriage because I heard you were a college-educated nurse. David, I told you not to invite Rachel, didn't I?
I see. So that's how it is. David and Emily must have struggled with this too. You don't get to decide that. It's David and Emily who are getting married. George poured himself a glass of water from the table and drank it all in one gulp. Drinking water did seem to calm him a bit. He was, after all, a hospital director, and he wouldn't let himself lose complete control. Besides, George had a reason not to be swayed by David's words.
If you're going to complain so much, leave the hospital. Your future as the director is guaranteed. Do you really want to let some nobody take that seat?
I have no problem with that. You can choose whoever you want. I always planned to leave after the wedding. Now I can finally do something for my mother.
This was a serious miscalculation for George. If David had been the kind of man who craved status and power, he would have gotten along fine with George. But David was a different kind of person. That's why he met Emily and was able to build a life of love with her.
David was once afraid to go to school, because while he was at school, his mother, Laura, disappeared from his life. But one day, he saw Laura watching him from afar, and they reunited.
My mother worried that seeing me would cause more problems. But that moment started our secret meetings, and I wasn't alone anymore. That's why I was able to live my life the right way.
George's position grew worse and worse. I watched with satisfaction as the two young people backed the stubborn old man into a corner.
If you come to our house, you won't have to deal with any mother-in-law issues. Isn't that why Emily decided to marry you?
I was stunned by his selfish reasoning. David had introduced Emily to Laura not long after they started dating. The two hit it off quickly and even went shopping together. On top of that, Emily had heard plenty of complaints from David about George, leaving her with a terrible impression of him.
We're ready to leave you behind, George.
Saying this, Emily pulled off her white gloves. She bundled them with her veil and tossed them onto the sofa by the window. George looked utterly shocked. He had just fired the longtime housekeeper, fully expecting Emily to take her place. "I didn't raise Emily just to become your housekeeper." As I firmly declared this, Emily looked at me with admiration and confidence. Backed into a corner, George started flattering me. He probably thought that if he could win me over, David and Emily would fall in line.
Rachel, you raised Emily, so you understand. Think about how much money I've spent on David. Because he's my own flesh and blood, I spared no expense for him.
With all due respect, I didn't raise Emily expecting anything in return. I knew I couldn't be with her forever. That's why I wanted her to grow strong enough to live without me.
I'm not saying that's wrong. No, it's not wrong, but you should be a little more grateful. We, who raise children, go through a lot and deserve to be rewarded.
I let out a breath through my nose in disbelief. Soon, I stopped caring and actually enjoyed watching George squirm with frustration. Is that so? Do we parents really deserve to be rewarded?
What do you mean? Maybe raising a nurse wasn't that difficult, but I raised a doctor. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on his education.
And you expect gratitude for that? What if David had other talents? Did you ever consider that?
There was no need to consider anything. He's set to become the director of a major hospital. How could he possibly complain?
To George, raising David was more of an investment than an act of parenting. If he truly loved his son as a father should, he wouldn't expect anything in return. George didn't understand what unconditional love was. This conversation is pointless. You talk as if the money you spend is a debt that needs to be repaid. Beside me, Emily nodded deeply several times.
I'm truly grateful to Rachel. She gave up so much of her own life to raise me. Now it's my turn to give back. But David will never feel the same way about you, George.
George glared at Emily.
What do you mean by that? You just said you wanted to give back to Rachel.
Rachel gave me unconditional love. That's why I want to repay her. But I wouldn't be surprised if David gives you nothing. Because you expect something in return.
What's wrong with expecting something in return? He started thinking this way because he got involved with a poorly raised woman like you.
David suddenly burst out laughing. George's face turned red with rage as he glared at David. But David didn't back down.
Calling me ungrateful is a joke. From now on, I'll be taking care of my mother the way I couldn't before. Just not you, Dad.
Listening to Emily, I drained the water from my glass with a sense of satisfaction. I remembered that the Johnson Clinic had recently undergone a full renovation. It must have cost a fortune. Even though George was wealthy, I doubted he paid for the hospital renovations out of pocket. He probably took out a hefty loan. The repayment plan likely counted on David taking over and paying it off. What happens if the heir walks away? I wondered if George, now in his 60s, had the means to repay the debt. If he used the hospital as collateral, he might manage, but if he couldn't repay it, he'd lose his position as director. I made up my mind to reveal a devastating truth to George. If things hadn't escalated like this, I might have hesitated and let it all slide. But it was clear George wouldn't understand reality unless he suffered a serious blow. Resolute, I prepared to deliver the final blow. George, tomorrow, our newspaper plans to publish a whistleblower article. It's about your hospital. Does anything come to mind? George stared at me blankly. It seemed he had no idea.
An expose about the hospital. What on earth are you talking about?
It's about the malpractice you committed 2 years ago. A young boy died after a surgery you performed. His parents are claiming it was a medical error. Emily and David, who hadn't heard this before, widened their eyes in shock.
Dad messed up a surgery and the patient died. 2 years ago, I was already a doctor at the Johnson Clinic.
Yes, David, you might remember the boy. His name was Michael. He was 10 years old. He came in for an appendectomy, which George performed, but his condition suddenly deteriorated after surgery, and he died. David furrowed his brow, searching his memory, then suddenly looked up.
I remember him. He loved soccer, and I did his initial checkup. Besides the appendicitis, he had no other issues. I was shocked when I heard he died.
The incident was recorded as sudden heart failure, but his parents couldn't accept it and consulted a lawyer. Recently, they decided to file a lawsuit and contacted me as a reporter. Having raised Emily, I knew all too well the pain of losing a child. Since the accident happened just 2 years ago, many people involved would still remember it.
I was a nurse in the internal medicine department, so I wasn't directly involved. But I did hear about the boy who died shortly after surgery. If I recall, that's when George stopped performing surgeries, right?
Everyone could see George's body trembling. Even if it was an accident, there was no way George felt nothing about it. He must have lost confidence after the failure and gave up being a surgeon. The boy's parents asked me to pursue this case. Even if they can't win in court, they refuse to stay silent.
What do you mean by that?
The truth is, I've been investigating your past for a while now. Bit by bit, I've uncovered several wrongdoings you've committed. Perhaps holding power for so long corrupts even those who start with pure intentions. When George first became a doctor, he likely wanted to save as many lives as possible. But the man standing here now has his hands dirty with various misdeeds. I hesitated to go after you, knowing you'd become Emily's father-in-law. But I deeply understand the pain of that boy's parents, and today I've seen your true colors. I won't hesitate to expose you. Receiving gifts from several state legislators was the least of his offenses. He underreported hospital profits and gave preferential treatment to wealthy patients. The skeletons in his closet were endless. If George's position as hospital director led him to these crimes, then David taking over that role would be problematic. David was clearly in shock, unaware of most of this.
I can't call you my father anymore. My mom is waiting in the lobby. Emily, let's change and go to her right away.
Let's do it. Gentlemen, please leave the room.
David grabbed George's arm, and I gave him a firm push out into the hallway. David then left the room, heading to his own waiting room. From the other side of the door, George's desperate voice rang out.
Please attend the ceremony. Directors of hospitals from other states and state legislators are here. You can imagine what will happen if the wedding doesn't go through.
Sorry, but as someone you called a lowlife with just a high school diploma, I wouldn't know. I called the front desk, explained the situation, and asked if they could remove George from the doorway and take him somewhere else. The manager answered the phone.
We can't exactly isolate him, but we'll escort him to another waiting room. However, we've invested heavily in preparing this ceremony, so there will be a cancellation fee.
That didn't bother us one bit. After all, George was the one who organized this event. For his own reputation, he had invited a bunch of important people who had nothing to do with the couple getting married. Let George pay the hefty cancellation fee.
Let's go, Rachel. I want to introduce you to Laura. She's a wonderful person, and I'm sure you'll get along well.
Yes, I'd love to meet her. When the two of us arrived in the lobby, David was talking to a woman who looked to be in her early 60s. She wasn't dressed in an expensive suit, but she had an undeniable charm and grace. I stepped forward and greeted Laura. Nice to meet you. I'm Rachel, Emily's sister. She's still young and have a lot to learn, but please take care of Emily.
Don't be silly. She's a wonderful woman. I'm looking forward to getting to know her better.
The four of us left the hotel and took a cab to David's favorite restaurant. We decided to have a small family-only wedding there. David and Emily were deeply concerned about the surgery involving the boy from 2 years ago. They promised to do everything they could to help uncover the truth. Thus, the medical malpractice that George tried to cover up was finally brought to light. The next morning, an article appeared in the newspaper stating that the parents of the 10-year-old boy had filed charges against George. The outcome was left to the courts, but George had no choice but to resign as director. Every day, reporters from other newspapers and magazines swarmed his house, making it impossible for George to even go for a walk. Other crimes he had committed also came to light. The Johnson Clinic fell into dysfunction and eventually went bankrupt. No one was there to help George, who was drowning in debt. Even when he needed to earn money, no one would hire him. Selling his house and land wasn't enough, and he spent his days doing grueling manual labor. He was occasionally seen sleeping in work clothes, curled up on the stairs of a building. Eventually, he disappeared completely. Emily, now married to David, started living with Laura. Laura was a kind woman who treated Emily with great care. I often visited their home, enjoying pleasant conversations and meals together. Until now, I had lived only for Emily's happiness, but with this new family, I found myself wanting more. From now on, I'm going to live for my own happiness too.